how significant is it that the U.S. president came from Kyiv and made the speech he did today in Poland?
Poland, throughout the years, many years, and many terms of different presidents, has had a special relationship with the United States. I personally had the chance to work on 3 visits of President Obama to Poland, 1 visit of President Trump. Now it's, well, I'm not in Poland right now, but I observed the 2nd visit of President Biden, which is great. It shows the special link, especially today. It is very important since Poland plays such an important role in the context of war in Ukraine right now.
And it's in that context, right, that the president from the United States made the speech today. It's that we are just a few days away of marking this awful anniversary of 1 year of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Is it more significant that he made those comments in Europe, right next door to where this is all unfolding, than if he had said them in Washington?
It is spectacular that he went to Ukraine a couple of days ago, which was a surprise, and it's absolutely marvelous that this visit was kept in such a secret. It's very difficult with the organization of the visit of American president. But so the words he said in Kyiv are very important. And then coming to Poland, which is basically a hub for international support to Ukraine, the words were absolutely significant with the recognition of the role of that Poland played, the Polish people played throughout the last year, but also recognizing the actions and the support of the international community. I think Poland is the place to talk about such issues because the whole international support in all possible realms is coming, majority of it is coming through Poland.
And the president certainly did talk about or insisted that that support would be there right until the very end. That's basically word for word what he said. At the same time, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, is making a State of the Nation address, as we highlighted there, basically accusing the West through that support of waging its own war on Russia, which is probably not a surprise, but he kind of packs that together with the idea that he's going to suspend Russia's participation in this nuclear arms treaty. What do you take away from that?
I think many experts were worried that the words of Putin would be stronger. But the message for me from his speech is that well, first of all, there was lack of content in the
even though it was 2 hours.
Even though it was 2 hours. And the message, the nuclear message, is not as strong as some might want to, fortunately, as some might expect it, because it's the suspension, it's not necessarily the withdrawal, and it's a suspension of a system which does not work anyway. So, you know, those inspections were, you know, difficult or didn't work for a number of reasons. So it's my hope is that at this point we do not need to worry about the nuclear context.
So then what is Putin's angle here today, do you think? What message is he trying to deliver to the West?
Well, his messaging was about words, is again about misconceptions and manipulations on the historical level, on the level of the role Russia played in the horrid aggression on Ukraine. I think even he is right now in the wait and see mode, because I mean, at this point even he has to understand that the level of complexity of the situation, the fact that he on so many fronts he already lost the war, on the political sense, in the international arena, in the area of restricting the role of NATO in the region, he achieved exactly the opposite. And both sides are in the mode of entering into some sort of counteroffensive. So I don't see any special content in the words that he presented.
So let me ask you then, the one place where Russia has not lost yet is on the ground. When you talk about the offensive that both are expected to mount against each other, key to that, according to Ukraine's president, is the supply of fighter jets. Poland has signaled that it is willing to supply fighter jets, the MiGs, but does not want to go it alone, would like allies more largely to at least lend some to offset that supply. Where do those discussions stand, and is the line kind of black and white for Poland? Will Poland not go that alone?
Poland was on the lead on most of the significant topics during the war, whether it was sanctions, whether it was some preliminary ideas on military support, recently whether it was Leopard tanks, so the modern equipment. We were already in the conversation on fighter jets back in the day, and our position is similar today as it was before. We believe all possible support that the allies are able to provide is needed, but in the case of fighter jets, it is a little bit more complicated, and I wouldn't believe that Polish politicians would do the same thing as it was the case with Leopards. That Polish president said that we will simply provide the Leopard tanks. We will not do it alone in terms of.
There's a difference.
Of just there is a tactical difference, and there is a political difference and a strategic difference. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you.
That's Poland's ambassador to Canada, Witold Jalski. Let's get some more perspective now on what's happening with Russia and Ukraine from two of Canada's former foreign affairs ministers. John Manley was also a former Liberal deputy prime minister. He's now a senior business advisor with Bennett Jones. Peter MacKay was also a former Conservative defense minister, and he's now a strategic advisor for Deloitte and McInnes Cooper. Hi, Mr. MacKay. Hi, Mr. Manley. Good to see you both. Mr. MacKay, I'm going to start with you, and I'll pick up where I left off with the ambassador on the subject of fighter jets and Ukraine's kind of need for this next step. You heard the ambassador say that this is a bit politically and tactically different than, for example, even the tanks. Do you expect this to be a different discussion among allies?
It's an area that creates greater complexity and greater danger as far as those NATO countries coming into a direct conflict with Russia, which, as you know, triggers Article 5, and everybody is all in. But the Polish have been by far the country that's been most forward-leaning, both in terms of compassionate aid and fleeing Ukrainians, but also in terms of the aid with the military aid, with tanks, with artillery, and a very early commitment to provide these MiG fighter planes, which, Vashi, as you may know, are the same planes that Ukraine has been flying and has a small number of, and it's the same plane that's made in Russia. So there is a possibility that this could happen, but they don't want to be isolated. They want to know that they will have the support of other countries, most notably the United States, and certainly the visit of President Biden this week goes a long way to give that sense of security and support. And they also want to know that if they give these planes up, that they will receive others to replace them, because there is real and justifiable fear that they could be next, that they could very well wind up pulled into this conflict, and that who knows the outcome of what's happening on the ground in Ukraine just yet, that Poland is also at some degree of risk, and they would be closest to the conflict.
Mr. Manley, I think if I had asked the same question of both of you, and the three of us were talking a year ago, it would be hard to imagine a world in which we were supplying tanks and the amount of lethal aid that the West is supplying Ukraine, and has kind of the evolution of that position among Ukraine, Canada, and all of our allies. Do you envision a point at which the fighter jet conversation changes too?
It's happened, and quite honestly, at the end of February last year, I didn't think this conflict would last that long. I thought that the odds were in favor of the Russians really bringing about the collapse of the Ukrainian government. They had overwhelming force. What they didn't have was a plan, and they didn't have trained troops, and they underestimated the determination of the Ukrainians to protect their own territory. And I think all of us underestimated the capacity and the communications ability of President Zelensky, who has been a formidable asset for Ukraine in all of this. None of this was foreseeable. I think the problem here that we're going to deal with, Vashi, is that both sides are actually running out of some of the resources that are necessary. Russia has been able to put its economy essentially on a war footing. They're targeting the production of weaponry. They're being supplied by Iran to a very great extent. China has been on the sidelines, but I think comments at the Munich Security Conference this past week suggest that may not be a permanent situation if there's no ceasefire. And on the western side, let's face it, there's only so many planes. Quite apart from planes, there's only so much other equipment, and the U.S. industrial military complex is reluctant to go all out in production without assurances that governments are going to continue buying. And it's not clear that Congress would give that authority if the administration sought it. So both sides are running low on weaponry. Both sides are running low on human resources. There's really no way to resolve this at the present time. There's no off-ramp. There are on-ramps to greater escalation, which is why the N word is getting used. But really, I don't see how we get out of this in the short term.
So Mr. McKay, when you think about the potential for an off-ramp, do you agree with the assessment it's hard to see one? And if so, what are the kind of wider consequences for Canada and our allies?
I definitely agree with John's assessment that there is no end in sight and arguably no end game. And I'm not sure there really ever was. Vladimir Putin has had almost a delusional vision for his plans to recreate the Soviet Union. That was simply never going to happen, and yet for all of the death and destruction, and it has been significant, tens of thousands dead, hundreds of thousands wounded, trillions of infrastructure damage and environmental degradation, and the spillover effects that this has had for both energy and food and environment, all of this has been truly shocking the last year when you take stock of all that has happened. And, to come back to John's reference to nuclear escalation and what Putin has said today about pulling back from the START treaty, I thought it was telling that the former president, former prime minister, Dmitry Medvedev, spoke about a nuclear power losing a conventional war increases the likelihood of a nuclear war. And this, of course, is another startling comment coming from a high-ranking Russian. But it is part, I believe, of the saber-rattling, threatening nature of all of the communication coming out of Russia. And let's not lose sight of what was said today by Putin is very much to a Russian audience. This is meant to have people rally around the flag, to create further false narrative that Russia itself was under attack and is the victim, and somehow the West are to blame for all of this, and that Ukraine is really just a pawn in this global game. But the challenge, as John alluded to, and the challenge for all NATO countries, Western countries, particularly those in the region, is how does this end? And how can we, in any realistic world, see anything but the complete defeat of Russia? And that is to push them right back to the territorial boundaries that were there before not just the invasion, Vasi, but this goes back to the invasion and annexation of Crimea in 2014. And so this is a stalemate that is going to grind on for a significant period of time. And there is many, many more risks as more equipment, more deadly weapons are brought to the front, and more individuals are put in harm's way with no ability, it would appear, on the part of Putin to back off. He's clearly all in and is intent on trying to overrun the entire country of Ukraine, and that will not happen.
Mr. Manley, last word too. I just have 30 seconds left. Just based on what both you and Mr. McKay laid out, how challenging does that become for Canada, for example, in its efforts to, as Joe Biden put it today, stand with Ukraine until the end?
A pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Premier Legault wants the Safe Third Country Agreement to apply at Roxham Road. If your government's negotiations with the U.S. are successful, is that what your government wants to see too?
What we're hoping to see is the promotion of regular migration channels and to discourage people from crossing in an irregular way. Keep in mind that people make asylum claims now not just at Roxham Road, but across the Canadian border, including through people who arrive by air. There's a number of different aspects for this, but across the board, we're trying to promote open immigration policies, but a controlled border. This is the path forward to treat people with respect and to provide an opportunity for those in search of safe haven to find it in Canada, but to do it in an organized way, including at the border.
So can I ask you to be specific about what exactly that means? Because my question was whether or not the agreement should apply at the Quebec border. I take your point that there are people claiming asylum through other border points, but the numbers are very minimal compared to Quebec, about 39,000 to 300 and something actually, so a big disparity there. So at Quebec, is it your government's preference for asylum seekers along that entire stretch to be turned back to the United States eventually if your negotiations are successful with the U.S.?
Well, the whole principle behind the Safe Third Country Agreement is if they have the opportunity to make an asylum claim in a country where they can have it fairly heard and are safe, that we would prefer for them to do so. The reality is that there are existing exceptions to those rules in certain circumstances. For example, people who are seeking to be reunified with family members. I hesitate to get too deep into the very specific provisions of an agreement that is not yet finalized because we do have work to do with our American counterparts, and this is a discussion that's taking place in real time. But the general principle behind the Safe Third Country Agreement is that people should be able to make an asylum claim in the country where they are first safe to do so, which would encourage people who are currently crossing at Roxham Road to make an asylum claim in the United States if they find themselves there before an onward journey into Canada.
How are you going to accomplish that without the agreement, though, applying to Roxham Road?
Well, I think that's one of the points that we need to continue discussing with our partners at the United States. In the meantime, there's things we need to do within Canada to treat people with respect who have come here under existing laws and made an asylum claim. But dealing with the situation at the border, including at Roxham Road, is certainly one of the key points of discussion between Canada and the United States as we seek to modernize the Safe Third Country Agreement to provide a lasting solution.
What is the impetus for the United States to make any changes? Why, for example, would they want those 39,000 people seeking asylum to do so in the United States? Don't they have much to lose and Canada only has something to gain?
The reality in the United States from my conversations is that they are demonstrating political will to work with us to find a lasting solution. As you can imagine, making sure that there is a secure border is a major priority for the United States. Of course, disproportionately, their concern is at the southern border between Mexico and the United States. But they're very serious about making sure that they have orderly operations at the U.S.-Canadian border as well. You will have seen recent stories in the American news networks about northern border security caucuses emerging from certain wings of political parties in the United States. But more than that, my sense is they want to be a good partner with Canada. They are our largest and most important partner from an economic and social point of view, and they want to make sure that we have an arrangement that suits both the American and Canadian interests when it comes to promoting regular and orderly migration.
Minister, with respect, if in fact that political will does exist and if they want to be a good neighbor and a good friend to Canada, why hasn't your government been able to capitalize on that? You've been in these discussions to modernize this agreement for more than 5 years, and there has been no such modernization taking place. Why not?
Well, for a significant portion of that 5-year period that you've just referred to, the border was closed, in particular over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. New rules were put in place where people would have been turned back at the border had they tried to cross as part of the public health response to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in communities. It was only when the border reopened for discretionary travel that this became an issue that saw people seeking to cross in an irregular way again. Of course, these conversations don't just play out over a matter of days or months. This is an issue that dates back nearly 20 years, where the agreement was first concluded between the United States and Canada. Managing the migration between Canada and the U.S., both regular and irregular, is going to be a topic of conversation that continues as long as Canada and the United States shares a border. This is merely the next phase in these conversations that we want to continue to have an orderly arrangement that promotes regular migration across the U.S.-Canada border.
And Minister, again, I have to challenge you because I do understand that COVID changed the game for a few years when the border was shut down. But this issue existed for a number number of years prior to the pandemic, prior to the border being closed. Your government had no movement in that period on modernizing the agreement. Why should Canadians believe that such a modernization will occur now?
Well, I can speak from my own experience. My sense is in the last number of weeks in particular, there's been some real optimism that I have that we're moving in the right direction in our conversations with our American counterparts. I spoke to the Canadian ambassador just a matter of days ago. Within the next few weeks, I expect to be having my next meeting with my American counterpart to discuss the next phase of the Safe Third Country Agreement. It is a work in progress. There is work that remains to be done and regulatory processes on the American side of the border, as well as whatever measures we must implement in Canada. But my sense is one of optimism that we'll be able to find a lasting solution in a relatively short period of time.
What does a relatively short period of time mean? And I ask again, not sort of glibly, but because it's been more than 5 years.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I expect that we're going to have progress over the next few months, but the reality is there are certain factors that are not nailed down. I have no announcement to make as part of our conversation today, but we need to respect the conversations that we're having privately with the United States in order to give them space to continue the conversation with us, but also to move forward with the regulatory processes that they need to undertake within the own American political context. We don't have a firm date where we expect an announcement to come forward, but I have been encouraged by the nature of the conversations moving towards a resolution of our discussions to modernize the Safe Third Country Agreement, in particular in recent weeks.
Will this be on the agenda when President Biden visits Canada?
Look, with respect, I think you'll probably appreciate that I don't set the agenda for meetings between the President and Prime Minister, but it's an ongoing conversation we've been having not just at an officials level, but that I've had with my counterpart. And as I said just a moment ago, expect to be meeting over the next few weeks to discuss it personally as well. We're going to continue to move forward, and depending on the particular status of our conversations at the time, it may well be something the Prime Minister chooses to raise, as I know he has with some other American political actors more recently.
And I get that you're not setting the agenda and you don't have a crystal ball for it, but I'm trying to ascertain for Canadians watching tonight where this falls on the priority list in the relationship between our two countries. And you can't even tell me for sure at this point that the Prime Minister will be talking to the President about the issue?
I expect they may discuss this issue amongst a range of others, but I can assure Canadians that making sure that we have an orderly arrangement at the border is a top priority for Canada. We want to maintain controlled borders that have open doors for people who are coming for economic, humanitarian, or family reunification purposes. This is something that has our full attention. We're working to put a plan in place, not just to finalize the Safe Third Country Agreement, but to more equitably spread out people to communities that have the capacity to house them and to create economic opportunities for employers to put people to work who might find themselves here now. There's no silver bullet to solving a very difficult challenge, but we're in the reality of a situation where we have many people who've come here irregularly. We want to treat them with respect as we continue to move forward with a lasting solution to the Safe Third Country Agreement.
Okay, Minister Fraser, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Pleasure as always. Thank you so much, Vashi.
And the Prime Minister accidentally demonstrated it during COVID. He closed Roxham Road during the COVID period, but then he decided to reopen it. That was a decision. It wasn't an accident. So we as a country can close that border crossing.
But dealing with the situation at the border, including at Roxham Road, is certainly one of the key points of discussion between Canada and the United States as we seek to modernize the Safe Third Country Agreement.
A little bit there of the political back and forth between the leader of the opposition and the federal minister in charge of immigration and refugees in this country, Sean Fraser, from earlier on the program. That political back and forth is very much focused on what's known as Roxham Road. That's the piece of the border between Canada and the U.S. in Quebec that has basically become an irregular point of entry for last year, 39,000 people seeking asylum from the United States. Let's bring in the front bench to talk about some of that political back and forth. With me this evening, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's the CEO of Space Canada now. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is here as well. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is here this evening, as is Le Devoir columnist Emily Nicolas. Hi, everybody. Really good to see you. Tom, I'm going to start with you because there's a sort of tactical, logistical, I don't know what the right word to use. There's stuff happening here that Quebec legitimately has an issue with, but there's a lot of politics at play too, right? This has long been an issue for Quebec, and certainly control over immigration is something that the Premier wants more of.
Immigration, he says, we haven't gotten to separation in these grand evenings we planned around our referenda, so this time we're going to go at it, meaning some form of autonomy, step by step. And this is one of the steps. And you're quite right to put that in the context here. Roxham Road is a problem because, of course, the easy answer from Poilievre is shut that down. But the next road over on the Canada-U.S. border would open up. These are irregular crossings. Under the Safe Third Party Agreement, if you come to a regular border crossing, you're told, no, the United States obeys the same international laws as Canada. You have to start your process of asking for asylum in the United States. So that's part of the deal here. We've got to look at that agreement. By the way, we're allowed to leave that agreement. Poilievre is quite right on that. And I think that this is the type of thing that Mr. Trudeau has to be looking at. I think that Legault held back quite a bit. He's got a very bad track record when talking about immigration issues. So this is something that he set down in writing, first in writing to Trudeau yesterday and today in an English piece in the Globe and Mail that was quite well crafted, because it doesn't reflect badly on Quebec's history of dealing with these issues. In fact, he gives chapter and verse of times when Quebec has stepped up to the plate and let in very large numbers of people seeking refuge. But what he's saying is it can't continue. We're talking 40,000 people last year on top of all the other immigration that has been let in under the regular routes, and we're just running out of capacity. We're saturated with regard to housing, with regard to medical care, with regard to schools. And he's simply making that plea to Trudeau. But it's a very strong weight against Trudeau, who, it should be recalled, when Trump was in power, Mr. Trudeau boasted, don't worry about it. Here, the door is always going to be open. Well, that was heard by a lot of people, and now they're trying to use that open door.